What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back into the 415ers 3 times a week on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Marc Grandi, Evan Giddings with you as always. Marc, my man, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Evan. A tough last couple of days for the football world, of course. I know we'll talk about it in a little bit. Damar Hamlin, thoughts go out to him, trying to, push forward and talk about what's coming up for the 49ers, but it's kind of putting, and rightly so, a haze over the entire football world right now, what happened to him on Monday Night Football. But other than that, it's good to be back with you once again, Evan. Looking forward to another fun episode of the 415ers.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, right? Because the entire weekend and really the last, I would say, week, building off of Christmas to the New Year, it's all good times. This weekend had provided some really exciting football games, some very entertaining football games. Of course, the Niners and the Raiders being perhaps the best of the bunch, and then it is supposed to eventually culminate on Monday Night Football with a matchup that has large AFC playoff implications. Two of the best teams, arguably the hottest team in the AFC in the Bengals, and then a team bidding for the 1 seed in the Buffalo Bills at Buffalo. And about midway, a little more than midway through the first quarter, unfortunately, Damar Hamlin lays a tackle on T. Higgins, and everyone who did not see what happened, just go back and watch it, kind of experience for yourself. That's sort of what everyone was going through who watched it in the moment. I myself, Marc, did not have a chance to watch it live. I was listening on radio, so I'm curious what your first reaction was when you saw exactly what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching live. I will first say, if this is something that makes you uncomfortable, I would not go back and watch it. It's not gruesome in that you can, like other sports injuries where you could see a leg snap and you see a broken bone. It's not visually gruesome like that, but it is still difficult to watch. So if you don't enjoy those kinds of things, I would suggest try to stay away from the video as best you could. But essentially, as you mentioned, he tries to make a tackle and does make a tackle on T. Higgins. And it seemed like a pretty normal football play. He gets hit in the chest, which happens all the time on a football field. And he immediately gets up and he seems fine. And then you can kind of see his legs shake and he falls down backwards straight on his back. And he's down for a while. Immediately, everyone thinks a head injury because that's just what we've been programmed to think of on the football field, especially when you kind of see those wobbly legs. He was down for a while. Eventually, those of us watching on ESPN and ABC on Monday Night Football, Joe Buck says they're performing CPR on Hamlin down on the field. And at that moment, you already kind of knew something was wrong, at least more so than usual. And I'm not trying to make light of other head injuries, but this seemed like a bigger deal than that. And then when Joe Buck breaks that news that they're performing literally CPR on a player on the football field, right around midfield on Monday Night Football in front of a national audience, my heart just sank, and it was hard for me one to turn away from ESPN's coverage the rest of the night, and I want to applaud them. I think they did a fantastic job. The broadcast crew, Susie Colbert, Booger McFarland, Adam Schefter back in the studio, Lisa Salters on the sidelines doing a great job getting the story after the fact. Scott Van Pelt, Lisa Salters joined them as well. Ryan Clark was incredibly emotional. It was hard for me to turn away, Evan, and it's been hard for me to kind of focus. We're recording this a day later on Tuesday evening. It's kind of been a slog of a day because I've just been thinking about what we all witnessed. And the latest update is that he's, as we have here on Thursday evening or Tuesday evening, excuse me, is that he's still in critical condition. He was resuscitated twice, once on the field and once at the hospital in Cincinnati. It is an incredibly unique and difficult situation, and just thoughts and good vibes and prayers to Damar Hamlin and the entire Hamlin family, because what they're going through is unimaginable. I can't even begin to try to put myself in their shoes right now. I mean, I was shaken up enough just watching from thousands of miles away, not really knowing who Damar Hamlin is. So I can't imagine what people close to him are feeling.
Yeah, we definitely want to send our thoughts and prayers to him and those surround him. The information that you relayed, Mark, from his uncle, Dorian Glenn. So that's where that info comes from about him still needing to be sedated after having been resuscitated twice. Damar Hamlin is a 24-year-old secondary member of the Buffalo Bills. And look, all of this stuff is unfortunately a part of the game of football. That's something that cannot be changed. But in my opinion, Mark, and look, I was only listening on radio, so I was listening to the Westwood One call, Kevin Harlan and Kurt Warner. Um, and then I went back and watched, kind of the ESPN coverage from where it was picked up about, I would say 15 to 20 minutes before they officially, postponed the
Mm,
game or said they were not going to continue the game. So I kind of was airdropped in from having listened to the play and then the immediate aftermath because understandably the radio crew is kind of pushing all these commercial breaks down the line and they're trying to not do play by play of a guy who is getting CPR on the football field. But what stood out to me, Mark, and I think the conversation that a lot of people are having is the coverage surrounding Damar Hamlin. And I don't want to belittle him in this overall picture, but as it stands, I believe the latest update that we saw here on Tuesday night was that he was formerly on 100% oxygen at the hospital. He's been moved to 50% oxygen from a machine, so at least trending in a positive direction from that sense, being able to breathe more so on his own. But the coverage on television and even to some extent on radio, to me, screamed something that I didn't really have a good grip on until this moment. And I wish it didn't happen, obviously. But for a game that is as physical and violent as football is, many people I've heard describe each play as a miniature car crash. And if you want to experience what it's like to play football in the NFL, go outside and run into your garage door 70 straight times, leading with your head. So, with that in mind, it was a bit appalling to me the lack of ability from these big networks, ESPN, even Westwood One to some extent, knowing what to do, how to react to a situation like this, because there is so much kind of keep it moving of a mentality around these injuries, around these lines. And I know ESPN analysts today are much more prepared, but it was honestly a bit cringy, Mark, listening to some of the crews talking about this game immediately because it just felt like they were. I mean, no one's ever prepared for anything like this. But for a game that is our modern day form of the gladiator games, to not have even, and like a playbook of what to run in these sort of situations. And sure, they have happened before. An ambulance has been brought on the field before. A player's had to be resuscitated before, given CPR. Happens very seldom, but it has happened in the NFL before. And I'm sure it's happened maybe on practice fields, things away from the game. But it was a bit appalling to me to kind of watch these, analysts tap dance around the fact this guy and his life was in the balance. And there seemed to be less of a, focus on, I guess, getting things right. And if needing to, maybe even throwing to regular programming and saying, hey, guys, we are not equipped to handle this situation, rather than, kind of mumbling through it all and making me as a viewer maybe even more, shocked, maybe even more scared because Damar Hamlin is clearly, fighting for his life at this point, and that much is able to be sensed. But I was not given any form of, I guess, security from what I was watching on television.
I hear you. I think I would fire back in the sense that these were people who were put into an impossibly difficult situation because of, as you mentioned, the uniqueness. There have been similar things. I know there was a moment in hockey where what presumably happened to Damar Hamlin happened to a hockey player who took a puck to the chest at just the right moment of a heartbeat or the wrong moment of a heartbeat, and it caused this issue. It caused heart failure, and it needed to be resuscitated. Like things like this have happened in sports before, but it's been such a long time, and it hasn't necessarily happened on this platform before. I do understand where you're coming from. However, I would say this was an impossible situation. And the fact that it took the NFL over an hour to officially postpone the game put these people, the talking heads, the analysts, the studio hosts, everyone in an impossible situation because they were tasked with trying to update a situation over an hour-long span that essentially had no update other than the fact that he was taken off the field in an ambulance and was rushed to the nearest hospital. Uh, I don't know how you are supposed to do that when you literally have no new information. I don't know. I did personally didn't feel the way you felt. I can understand that feeling. You're a viewer. You want to, I don't know, hear something positive and encouraging and hear someone tell you, hey, it's gonna be all right. But I think in that moment, no one knew. I mean, for all they knew, when Damar Hamlin got into the back of that ambulance, the worst news could have been, coming moments later. I don't know. I understand what you're saying, but I also feel that it was just simply an impossible situation. And from my perspective, I thought they handled it relatively well and they covered it with relative class and dignity. But maybe we'll look back on it in the future if something similar happens and we see them handle the situation better. I'm not so sure, but overall, I thought they did what they could with what is just an incredibly unfortunate situation.
No, that's fair. Look, and putting yourself in their shoes, I'm not saying I would have been able to do anything better. And maybe it's not so much on the analysts as it is on those giving them information. And if we're talking about
It's on the NFL. The first instinct for the NFL was okay. Warm up, Joe Burrow. 5 minutes, we'll start playing again. What? They're giving him CPR on the field, and you're telling the players to start warming up? And then you have to wait a whole hour before you officially say, yeah, this isn't happening. By the way, it was never going to happen because the players and the coaches, rightly so, were refusing to play. Like, are you kidding me, NFL? Your first instinct was say, take 5 guys, and then we'll go again. It's utterly ridiculous.
well, but that's the way it's always been. Like, so again, if like there were so many stories shared today throughout different outlets, and you know, one of our own, Lorenzo Neal, talking about his teammate literally being shot in the middle of the season and having to just put his head down and power through. I know ESPN's Dominic Foxworth has told a story about an experience in college when he went to Maryland where a player was paralyzed during practice. And he said basically the team just moved the practice down 20 yards. Like that's to me the I guess the crux of the issue with the NFL is that there is such an acceptance of violence, and this is a very unique situation. But I just that acceptance to me is echoed by those talking about the game, and we're not expecting when we watch football when we talk about we're going to go to war, we're gonna ride or die with this guy. Well, they're not literally meaning like die, but that's what almost happened on that field last night. And Damar Hamlin is still fighting for his life. I just felt like the message that I felt, and whether it's because of what the NFL didn't do immediately, because of what the information that ESPN was giving to its analysts lacked, or the you know kind of lost in translation message that I was receiving as a viewer on television. I don't know where it got lost, but to me there was it felt like a lack of just a lack of understanding. I mean, you said it yourself. The moment that you saw Damar Hamlin hit the ground, immediately something's wrong. I mean, that does not happen on a normal basis. And for the first 5 minutes, the first 10 minutes, the first 20 minutes being more focused on how to get back to the game, how to restore balance, how to restore, you know, a sense of security for your viewer. To me, that again, I just don't know if that's the message. Like, I could hear through the radio, through the play-by-play, there was a sense of panic from Kurt Warner for another football player down on the ground. That's the kind of message that I felt like prepared me for what I was going to then watch, as opposed to, what it sounds like people watched and then heard trying to sugarcoat a bit what just happened.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and I feel like that's where it's valuable to have the perspective of former players. Kurt Warner, like you're talking about on national radio, Troy Aikman, who was on the call, on television, Booger McFarland, who was back in the studio, Ryan Clark, who was on with Scott Van Pelt on ESPN's coverage after the fact, after the game officially got postponed. Um, you can hear and feel the emotion because I mean, people like you and I and everyone else who hasn't played football at a high level can't possibly understand what it's like. I mean, you talk to any even college football player, but especially an NFL player, they all have a story about a horrific injury, either to themselves or to a teammate or to someone that was close to them. Like literally, all of them do. It's the nature of this game. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way that the game is. uh, they all have an experience not like Damar Hamlin, but a lot more like Damar Hamlin than any of us. So you can feel their emotion, and I agree with you. Those kinds of I don't know, analysis reactions from those former players, including Kurt Warner on Westwood One, who I didn't hear, but I trust what you're saying. Uh, Incredibly emotional, and you can feel, as you're saying, the fact that they knew something was wrong, like immediately. And I think, a situation like this, while it is based on what we know, what the science is saying, what the doctors are telling us, a relative chance encounter. This is something that happens just because of a hit to the chest at the right exact millisecond in the middle of a heartbeat that causes this to happen. It's a chance encounter. It has actually really not a lot to do with the danger of football. Like it's just a chance thing that happened. But them being so, I don't know, immediately troubled by it, perhaps in the future makes responses to this sort of thing better.